Welcome, listeners. Ready to really sink your teeth into something?
Sounds a little ominous, don't you think?
Well, we are talking about Dracula, but, you know, not the vampires you meet at a costume party. We're going deep into Bram Stoker's world, the 1897 book.
Ah, the original. Always the best place to start.
Exactly. And to help us unpack all the layers, we've got insights from some seriously dedicated readers, those who've really dug into what makes this book tick, even after all these years.
It's fascinating how a novel written over a century ago can still have so much to say, isn't it? And one of the things that really jumps out, at least from the readers we looked at, is that Dracula isn't just a chilling horror story.
It's deeper than that.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like a gothic mirror reflecting all these anxieties that were bubbling beneath the surface of Victorian England.
Ooh, I like that. A gothic mirror. And you know what? One of the readers pointed out something similar. They said that Dracula himself embodies not just the fear of, well, the supernatural, but also all those cultural and religious prejudices of the Victorian era.
Right. It's like he's this walking, or rather stalking, embodiment of everything that made Victorians nervous.
Okay, but Dracula, I mean, that was inspired by Vlad the Impaler, right?
Right.
A real historical figure. So it's not just made up anxieties. There's a real-world connection.
Oh, absolutely. Stoker definitely drew on that history, but then he did something even more clever, I think. He created something even more terrifying by making Dracula this amalgamation, this composite figure.
So it's like Dracula's got layers.
Exactly. He's woven from various sources, legends, historical figures, which makes him, in a way, both familiar and utterly alien to the Victorian psyche.
Huh. This is already making me think about the book in a whole new light. So not just one monster, but like a whole bunch of anxieties rolled into one. And this whole thing about the other being a threat, I mean, that feels very relevant even today, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. That fear of the other, anything or anyone perceived as foreign, different, or threatening to the established way of doing things, it was huge in Victorian England. Think about all the rapid changes happening then.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, you had industrialization happening at a breakneck pace. Cities were growing like crazy. People were pouring in from all over.
So a lot of disruption to like traditional life.
Exactly. And that created this undercurrent of unease. People were suspicious of anything that seemed to challenge the status quo.
And Dracula, he's the ultimate outsider, isn't he? Coming from a foreign land.
With a thirst for what is essentially the lifeblood of Victorian England.
It's brilliant. Stoker tapped into something very real, very primal. And you know what? In a way, it still resonates, even today. We might not be worried about vampires in the literal sense.
But those anxieties about the other, oh, those are still with us in all sorts of ways. And you know, it's not just Dracula himself. Stoker uses the other characters in the story to explore those anxieties from different angles. Take Jonathan Harker, for instance. He's the one who ends up trapped in Dracula's castle.
Oh yeah, poor Harker. He seems like he's in way over his head right from the start.
And yet, even though he's clearly out of his depth, one of the things that struck me reading these reviews is how much Harker gets praised for his manliness, especially as the story unfolds.
That's interesting. Feels a bit old-fashioned, maybe. I mean, does that even fit with how we see heroes today?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of how heroism itself is influenced by the values of a particular time and place. In Victorian England, self-control, stoicism, that kind of stiff upper lip, those were seen as admirable qualities.
So Harker, even though he's terrified, he's trying to keep it together, he's observing everything, writing it all down.
Exactly. He clings to that sense of order, of rationality, even when he's surrounded by the supernatural. And in the context of Victorian ideals, that would have been seen as incredibly courageous.
Huh. I never thought about it like that. Okay, so we've got Harker trying to hold on to his sanity. But then you've got Renfield, who seems to go completely the other way.
Renfield, yes.
Yes.
Now, he's a character that often gets simplified in adaptations, but in the book...
Just a creepy fly eater.
Well, he is that, but there's so much more to him. One of the reviewers made this point, and it really resonated with me. They said that Renfield, for all his madness, he actually offers us the most insightful glimpses into Dracula's world.
Whoa, really? I wouldn't have thought of that. How so?
Well, think about it. Renfield's this scholar, a man of intellect, who descends into this terrifying communion with Dracula. He becomes, in a way, a kind of twisted disciple.
So he's both repulsive, but also there's this element of, like, he understands something about Dracula that the others don't.
Right, and that's one of the things that makes Stoker's characters so compelling. They're not just black and white, they're these shades of gray, like Mina, for example.
Oh, Mina. Now, one of the critiques we came across is that the novel sort of slows down when she enters the picture,
Yeah.
that it becomes, and I'm quoting here, a dull romance.
I can see where they're coming from, but honestly, I have to disagree.
Me too.
To reduce Mina's role to just a romantic interest is to completely miss the point. Because what Stoker does with her character is really interesting in terms of Victorian gender roles.
Okay, so how so?
Well, on the surface, you could say that Mina conforms to certain expectations. She's the devoted fiancée, the picture of Victorian womanhood. But underneath that,
There's more than one.
oh, absolutely. She's incredibly intelligent, resourceful, and she plays a much more crucial role in fighting Dracula than she's often given credit for.
One of the reviewers pointed out something really interesting about that. They were talking about how Mina ends up organizing all of Dr. Seward's notes.
Ah, yes, the phonograph recordings.
Right. And it struck me because here we have these men of science using the latest technology, and they're completely reliant on Mina to make sense of it all.
It's such a brilliant detail, and it speaks to this idea that in underestimating women, in trying to shield them from what they perceived as dangerous, the men actually end up putting themselves at a disadvantage.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. It's like their own biases blind them to Mina's strengths, which ironically become essential to defeating Dracula.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really interesting aspect of the novel highlighted by our second reviewer. They were fascinated by the structure of the story itself.
You mean the whole epistolary thing?
Yeah.
With the letters and diary entries and all that.
Exactly. They found that the format, rather than feeling dated, actually made the story even more effective.
It does create this really cool effect, doesn't it? You're like piecing this story together along with the characters. You're right there in the thick of it.
Exactly. It's like you're reading these confidential documents, these first-hand accounts, and you're getting this very immediate, almost visceral sense of what they're going through.
But as one of the reviewers pointed out, there's this interesting thing about Dracula. Even after you finish the book, you're still left with a sense of mystery. Like, we never really fully know Dracula, do we?
That's right. Stoker, very cleverly, he uses that epistolary format not only to draw us in, but also to withhold information, to leave these gaps in our understanding.
So it's like we're as much in the dark as the characters are, in a way.
Precisely. And we have to grapple with those limitations, those blind spots in our own perception, which, again, takes us back to this idea of the other, the unknown.
And how that ties into our deepest fears. One of the reviewers made a point that really resonated with me. They said that what's truly monstrous in Dracula might not be the vampire himself.
But rather the darkness that we find reflected in ourselves.
Ooh, is that the good one?
It's like Dracula preys on our deepest desires, our vulnerabilities, but those vulnerabilities, they stem from within.
So he's not just some external threat. He's exploiting something that's already there.
Exactly. He exposes the cracks in Victorian society, in its beliefs, its values. He manipulates those very anxieties that we talked about. The fear of female sexuality, the allure of forbidden knowledge.
All those things that were simmering beneath the surface of Victorian respectability.
And that, I think, is why Dracula continues to fascinate us, even after all these years. It's not just a horror story, it's a reflection of ourselves, of the darkness that exists within all societies, within the human heart itself.
It's kind of a chilling thought, isn't it? That the most terrifying monsters aren't necessarily the ones lurking in the shadows, but the ones we create, the ones we carry within us.
Indeed. And that's a truth that transcends time and place. It's as relevant today as it was in Victorian England.
So to our listeners, as you delve into the pages of Dracula, remember this. You're not just reading a gothic horror novel. You're embarking on a journey into the heart of what it means to be human, with all its complexities, its contradictions, and yes, its darkness.
And for those who want to dig even deeper, might I recommend the Oxford World's Classics edition. The annotations are truly insightful.
Yes, they really add another layer to the whole experience. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Bram Stoker's Dracula. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration as much as we have. Until next time, happy reading.